The townspeople became very worried and upset because the sun wouldn't set. All the crops began to dry out, and the vines couldn't retain any moisture. A meeting was called in the guild hall to decide what to do. The burgomaster called the town elders, and they all stroked their beards, because that's what you do as a burgomaster. They called the elders to report on what was causing this disaster. It was decided that Anna was the cause of this curse. It was decided that she was some sort of evildoer because she remained on her own and wouldn't speak to anyone. A plan was decided on to capture her. Anna was sitting and watching her love chasing clouds with the west wind, and she was laughing at him being so beautifully foolish. The sun had waded out waist deep into the ocean with his back to her when a group of men rode up at full gallop. They grabbed her, they gagged her, and they tossed her into a chariot. They tied her arms around the driver so she wouldn't fall out, and they rode off towards the town. Anna had tried to call to him, but they had surprised her. The sun finally caught the cloud he'd been chasing and poured his colors over the top so they dripped down through. When he turned to give it to her, he saw her riding away with her arms around another man. He went numb and his knees felt weak. The cloud floated out of his hands as he stared in disbelief. Suddenly, anger ran up and enveloped him in his yellowed arms. These are all personified. So anger is this really scary thing when grabs the sun, right? Enveloped the sun in his yellowed arms. The sun grabbed the cloud and tore it into a million mists. Jealousy and heartbreak rushed at him from below the earth and attached themselves to him. Jealousy surrounded his head in a green mist, and heartbreak sat on his chest and stuck long needle-like fingers into his heart. Fear strolled up, gaunt, skeletal. Fear strolled up and whispered horrible thoughts into his ears, and remorse climbed on his back and grinned. The weight forced the sun to sit down on the western mountains, and he began to cry. Anguish came rushing at the sun from below the earth. As the sun let out a long wail of sadness, anguish struck, penetrated the heart, and drove inside. He forced Lady Love into a corner. The impact of anguish toppled the sun over the mountains, and he fell down the other side. As he stood up, anger and jealousy covered his eyes, and he stumbled and fell many times before, bruised and bleeding, he reached his palace. The sun shut himself and locked himself into his innermost chamber and began to cry. Fear and remorse stood at the outside gates to guard the palace. Jealousy and heartbreak took their positions inside the chamber so they could stay close and remind him. Anguish settled into his son's heart and made himself quite comfortable. With the sun gone, night came running out of his castle and ran over the countryside. And Anna cried. The people rejoiced. Their plan had succeeded. They had conquered the sun. They had a huge celebration with Night at the chair of honor, with his son Twilight to his right, and their servant Sleep standing behind to do his every bidding. The people laughed and danced and sang far into Night's arms. Now here's what it sounds like when they're dancing. Dance. Finally, when everyone had drunk his fill and then some, Sleep took over the festivities and began to sing the saga of somnolence. He sings, "Close your eyes, surrender. Drift like leaves in fall. Snowflakes in December, hear the night winds call. Down, 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 down." When all had surrendered to Sleep's song, Night kicked back his chair, threw back his head, and began to laugh. And Anna sat and cried. When the town finally woke up and began to prepare for work, They noticed that there wasn't the familiar glow over the East Mountains as in the past. Well, thinking that their inner clocks had unwound because of the festivities, they all came back to sleep. And he assured them that everything was all right. All right. Upon awakening again, the people discovered that night was still standing over the town, laughing. He was very pleased that he was able to stay on Earth longer than usual. He began to play tricks on the people, being a mischievous creature. He sent mists and dreams to assume the shapes of dragons or headless spirits walking among the houses. Night laughed. And Anna sat and lay in her bed and cried. The sun was staying in his palace, and he wouldn't come out. He was dimming, losing his glow. His love had left him, and he was alone. Anguish kept him company, and jealousy would keep peeking in to see if he was still upset. The sun would cry for long hours, and his tears made golden rivers that ran into the rocks and solidified. Anguish was being fed by jealousy, fear, and remorse from the storerooms of the sun's palace. He had grown to where he had overpowered the little lady love in his heart and forced her into a corner. The sun's heart was bursting. He longed for Anna very much. Night's pranks became more malicious as time went on because he was irritable because he couldn't get any sleep. The townspeople were frightened, and many were being hurt from running blindly from Night's henchmen. Finally, Night called together all the mists, dreams, and spirits, and held the mass of confusion in the huge Gothic hall within his castle. Night sat at the pipe organ at the end of the hall, and the music fell into the darkness and smothered the people. A small circle of demons began to dance in the center of the hall, with all the rest watching. As the tempo of the music began to increase, more and more shapes joined the dance. Soon, the entire haunted assemblage was involved, swirling and blending in the eerie glow of the torches. This awful maelstrom began to give birth to an even greater evil. As the music grew harder and harder, a shape lifted its head from the swirling mass, and the rest of the spirits ran to take part. It was a horse of massive proportions, the worst of dreams, the dreaded specter Nightmare. With burning red eyes, the phantom tore itself up out of the spawn that the mass had spawned it, punctuating its struggled movements with ghastly shrieks. At the crescendo of the music, with the music screaming out of every window, the gates of Night's castle burst open, and Nightmare left across the threshold and stood there poised. And okay, this is so cool. Within the horse, all you can see, it's translucent, but within the contours of the horse, you can see all the spirits swirling and reaching and screeching within inside. It's got blood-red burning eyes. The horse, and Night is sitting on its back. The horse gave out a human scream and ran down into the town. Hang on, I gotta find my place because I missed it. The Nightmare lunged away from the castle and flitted down the hills into the town. As it reached the city, its tail would crack like a whip, and with each time, pow! Spirits would leap free from the hole, and they would run into different parts of the town. The ghoul was infecting the village with a pestilence of fear and evil. No one knew or understood what was happening. Turn the page. Anna had been kept locked in the wine cellar of the guild hall. Without her love and knowing he had been fooled, she pined away. She would eat nothing, and she became terribly ill. Anna was dying. Her brother Matthew was worried about her. He knew all that had happened because he sat with her every night and listened to her cry for her love. So Matthew decided that he would set out and tell the sun what had happened. He knew that Anna would try to stop him. So he quietly left her, packed a rucksack with provisions, and saddled his horse. He rode out of town to their house and took Courage down off the mantelpiece. This is his father's sword, Courage, right? The inscription on the blade reads, "All enemies bow to Courage." And the sword is beautiful. It's got a man's head on the top, and the beard from the head grows down around from the pommel, right down around the grip and across the crosspiece. The thing about the sword is, the sword takes on the likeness of the previous owner, so he's got his father with him. He ties it, he hooks it onto his belt. When all was ready, he hung the sword at his side and set out on his quest. Now Night saw him leaving, and sent a small group of worries to hinder him. When the evils came swooping down, so as they're flying, they're coming towards him, and as they are, their faces and their features are all pulling and stretching back as they're screaming and screeching and reaching down to get him, right? Switching in even more grotesque shapes. But when they saw that he had courage by his side, they stopped dead in their tracks and vanished.